The greatest construction project ever announced. A city stretching 170 kilometers across the Saudi desert. No cars, no roads, no carbon emissions, 9 million residents, 100% renewable energy. 2 mirrored glass walls, each 500 meters tall, reflecting the open sky across a perfectly straight corridor running from the Red Sea coast to the mountains of northwestern Arabia. When Saudi Arabia's crown prince unveiled it to the world, he called it a revolution in civilization, the most ambitious infrastructure project in human history. The renderings were extraordinary. Ski slopes inside a glass corridor, vertical forests above the desert floor, an ultra-high-speed transit system running the full 170 kilometers in 20 minutes. Architecture that looked like science fiction rendered in steel and mirror glass. The world's most ambitious megaproject. Saudi Arabia's declaration that the post-oil era had begun. Then, on September 16, 2025, the Public Investment Fund quietly suspended all construction. No ceremony, no press conference, no official statement. Just stop. And in a leaked internal audit from 2024, the numbers that explain everything, not $500 billion, 8.8 trillion, not 2030, 2080. Today, we follow the money, the ambition, and the collapse, all the way to the truth about the world's most expensive abandoned megaproject. To understand how a project backed by one of the world's largest sovereign wealth funds ends up suspended in the desert, you first have to understand what the line actually was, not what you saw in the CGI renders, what it actually required. The line was not a city in the conventional sense. It was a 170-kilometer-long enclosed structure, elevated above the Saudi desert floor, contained within 2 mirrored glass facades, each approximately 500 meters tall. The Great Wall of China stretches 21,000 kilometers, but it is never more than 15 meters tall. The line, at full specification, would have enclosed more total volume than any structure ever built by human civilization, by a factor of approximately 20. Inside that structure, the plan was to house a complete vertical society. Residential towers, parks, sports facilities, hospitals, schools, farms, theaters, a high-speed transit system running the full 170-kilometer length at speeds that would cover the distance in under 20 minutes. The structural engineering challenge alone had no historical precedent. To build 170 kilometers of 500-meter-tall structural foundations across shifting desert geology in an earthquake-prone zone at the scale and speed required to meet a 2030 completion target would have required a mobilization of construction materials, logistics, and labor beyond anything the modern construction industry had ever attempted. That is not rhetoric. Multiple independent engineering assessments reached the same conclusion. The concrete requirements alone exceeded what global supply chains could deliver. But in 2021, when the world was looking at those extraordinary renders, those numbers were not the conversation. The conversation was about the vision. NEOM as a concept predates the line by 4 years. The broader project, a special economic zone across 26,500 square kilometers of northwestern Saudi Arabia, was announced in 2017.
This project is the symbol
Multiple
of our
components were
post-oil
planned
future.
simultaneously. Sindalah, a luxury island resort on the Red Sea. Trojana, a mountain ski and adventure resort. The Rig, an offshore platform experience. And at the center of all of it, the line. Total committed investment across the NEOM portfolio, $500 billion. At the time, the Saudi Public Investment Fund held approximately $700 billion in assets under management. The math was aggressive, but on paper, it was not impossible. Then the real numbers started arriving. Here is what the public financial modeling for the line assumed. And here is where every assumption broke down. The project's business case rested on several interdependent propositions, each one reasonable in isolation, each one catastrophic in combination. First, Oil prices would remain sufficiently high to fund the public investment fund's global investment returns, which in turn would finance construction. In 2021, Brent crude averaged approximately $71 per barrel. Saudi Arabia's fiscal break-even price, the oil price required to balance the national budget without drawing down reserves, was estimated at around $80 per barrel. Those two numbers created a structural problem that no amount of architectural ambition could resolve. Every year that oil traded below Saudi Arabia's break-even price, the kingdom ran a fiscal deficit. That deficit had to be funded from somewhere. The largest available source, the Public Investment Fund. But the PIF was simultaneously the primary financing mechanism for NEOM. The same capital pool was expected to fund both the kingdom's annual operating costs and the most expensive construction project in human history. Second, the revenue model required 9 million residents inside the line, paying for housing, services, and amenities within the project's initial operational phase. Where were 9 million residents going to come from? Saudi Arabia's total population is approximately 35 million. The NEOM region's indigenous population, concentrated in the Hawaiitat tribal community, was forcibly relocated to make way for construction in a process that drew international human rights scrutiny. The remaining population required for the line's revenue could only realistically come from large-scale international immigration at a pace and scale that Saudi Arabia's current legal and social framework was not designed to support. No binding international recruitment mechanism existed. No immigration pathway was announced. No housing pricing model was publicly disclosed. Third, and most critical, the structural cost projections that leaked internally in 2024 invalidated every previous assumption in a single number. Text on screen. Leaked NEOM internal audit, 2024. True construction cost, $8.8 trillion. Cost per resident, $977,000. Completion at current trajectory, year 2080. Not $500 billion, $8.8 trillion, not 2030, the year 2080. That is not a rounding error. That is not a percentage deviation. That is a cost estimate 17 times larger than the number presented to the world when the project launched. At $8.8 trillion, the line would cost more than the combined annual GDP of Germany, Japan, and India. The cost per resident at the original 9 million target would be approximately $977,000 per person. Construction cost alone. No commercially viable economic model connects a $977,000 per resident construction cost to an affordable housing market for the international population NEOM needed to attract. These numbers were not public in 2021. They were not public in 2022 or 2023. They surfaced through investigative leaks and engineering analyses in 2024, by which point $50 billion had already been committed to the desert floor, and the PIF had a decision to make. The suspension of the line is not just a story about one megaproject. It is a story about Vision 2030, and what Vision 2030 was actually designed to be. Saudi Arabia holds approximately 17% of the world's proven oil reserves. That fact has been both the foundation of Saudi prosperity and the structural constraint on Saudi development for generations. Oil exports fund the government funds everything else. This dependency creates a precise vulnerability. When oil prices fall, the entire national budget comes under pressure. Vision 2030, announced in 2016, was Saudi Arabia's formal commitment to breaking that dependency within a generation. The strategy: use the remaining decades of oil revenue to build an entirely new economy. Tourism, entertainment, technology, manufacturing, financial services, international sport. NEOM was the centerpiece of that transformation, the flagship project that would demonstrate Saudi Arabia's capacity to compete at the frontier of global innovation. And that explains something important about why the line was designed the way it was. The renders were not engineering documents, they were positioning documents. They were designed to signal to global technology companies, to international institutional investors, to sovereign wealth partners considering long-term Saudi exposure, that this kingdom was not simply a petrostate managing its transition. It was a civilization builder operating at the edge of human ambition. The problem is that a positioning document and a viable construction plan are two fundamentally different instruments. And at some point, the desert requires one, not the other. The consequences now extend well beyond NEOM's desert construction site. Saudi Arabia's commitment to host the 2034 FIFA World Cup, which requires national infrastructure well beyond NEOM's Trojena venue, is now under scrutiny from international sporting bodies monitoring the delays. Saudi Arabia's sovereign credit rating and its capacity to attract the international capital partnerships that Vision 2030's remaining targets require are, to varying degrees, contingent on the credibility of the transformation narrative. The line was the anchor of that narrative, and the anchor has been lifted from the seabed.
When you model Saudi Arabia's trajectory honestly from this point, three distinct futures present themselves. Scenario 1. The AI pivot delivers. Saudi Arabia successfully repositions NEOM as a global AI infrastructure hub. The seawater cooling advantage, a genuine engineering asset at the Red Sea location, attracts major hyperscaler contracts from Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and their regional equivalents. Revenue flows, the PIF recovers a portion of its $50 billion investment. Saudi Arabia builds a credible technology infrastructure identity that feeds into Vision 2030's remaining diversification target. This scenario is plausible. The global demand for AI data processing infrastructure is real, and the Red Sea location does offer a structural cooling advantage. But it delivers none of the social transformation, the jobs, the tourism. The new economy that Vision 2030 was built to promise. Scenario 2. The managed retreat. NEOM continues in reduced form. Sindala delivers partial luxury tourism functionality. Some Trojena infrastructure proceeds at a slower pace, targeting a 2031 or 2032 completion rather than 2029. The AI server farm generates modest returns. Vision 2030's more achievable targets: domestic tourism, live entertainment, expanded sport. Progress on a revised, slower timeline. Saudi Arabia's diversification story continues, but with reduced ambition and recalibrated international expectations. If oil prices decline further, or if Vision 2030's 2030 milestones are visibly, publicly missed, Saudi Arabia faces a credibility gap with international investors that compounds existing fiscal press. This creates conditions for more difficult sovereign borrowing terms, reduced foreign direct investment, and a more turbulent transition to the post-oil economy and current planning assumptions. Accommodate. The probability of Scenario 3 is lower than the first two, but it becomes less unlikely with every missed milestone and every suspended flagship project. Here is what we know for certain. The most expensive construction project ever announced has been suspended. Not delayed, not paused for review, suspended. With $50 billion committed to the desert floor, and the real cost estimated at a figure that would exceed the annual output of most major economies. The gap between NEOM's renders and its reality tells us something important, not just about Saudi Arabia, but about the nature of megaproject ambition in the 21st century. The difference between a vision and an engineering plan. The difference between what sovereign Capital can promise and what geology, logistics, and market economics will actually deliver, and Megaproject. The line was extraordinary as an idea. As a construction project, it was never going to be built, and the question that now matters, for Saudi Arabia, for Vision 2030, for every economy watching the Middle East's next decade, is whether the kingdom can convert $50 billion of desert foundations into something that pays. The answer will shape a region. And the timeline is running. If this analysis changed how you see the world, subscribe. Every week, we go deep into the infrastructure, megaprojects, and strategic decisions quietly reshaping the global order. NCARD subscribe animation, related video recommendations,